as I told you, when we are dealing with CUET PG exam for history, chronology is very important, sources are very important. So this particular question that we are dealing with in this particular in our PYQ is dealing with chronology, right? We have to understand the relative chronology. How? Because a lot of time क्या होगा कि dates will be intermingling. कई सारे dates जो हैं आपको ऐसे लगेंगे कि they are confusing, right? So you have to be very much sure कि किस चीज को कहाँ पे contextualize किया जा सकता है and how they appear in a comparison with other developments, right? There are certain things for which chronology will be very clear, right? But in ancient history particularly, at times chronologies are very muddled up. ठीक है, आपको श्योर नहीं हो सकते कि भाई यही क्रोनोलॉजी है, बिकॉज देयर बी अ लॉट ऑफ ifs and buts and debates over dates, right? So you need to have a very broad understanding of chronologies ki largely jo hai we are dealing with this particular time frame within which we have to situate our particular developments. ठीक है, so this particular question deals with this listing of questions, listing of certain facts, right? तो इसमें जो है आपको 3-4 अलग अलग चीजें की गई हैं. नाउ देयर इज नो सिमिलैरिटी इन द लिस्ट वन, right? They all deal with particular events. They all deal with cultural development, Vedic text, Sangam literature, Prakrit and Sanskrit, language and literature. This is the broad theme, right? And we have been given a particular uh, theme. We have been given a particular kind of chronology, right? So 300 BC to 600 C, 3rd century BC. Now CD means circa approximately century, 1500 to 500 BC and AD 4th century C. This is our broad chronology that is associated with it, right? Now, how do we understand this chronology? Let's go one by one. First is Vedic text. Now, if you know, the Vedic period itself is divided over the period of in two parts: early Vedic and later Vedic. Early Vedic includes Rig Ved, which includes family book languages of Rig Ved, Samhita. ठीक है, वेदास है 4 पार्ट: संहिता, अरण्यका, ब्राह्मणा, उपनिषद. अब इन 4 पार्ट्स में भी आपको देखने को मिलता है कि संहिता हैज द major explanatory part. The shlok, the mantra, etc. are part of the samhitas, right? So samhitas are major of the one of the significant parts of the Vedas. ऋग वेद संहिता के में भी 10 किताबें हैं, 10 books, within which 1, 8, 9, 10 are considered to be later Vedic edition, which means 2 to 7 books are considered to be family books. Right, family books of Rig Veda Samhita are considered to be the oldest specimen of Vedic literature. Right. Then, when we come to later Vedic, we find all the other Vedas, be it Samved, Yajurved, Atharved, 1, 8, 9, 10 of Rig Veda Samhita, all the other part of Vedas, right? And all the other Vedic literature with all the 4 parts: Samhita, Aranyaka, Brahmana and Upanishad. So 1500 to 1000 BC is considered to be largely the period of early Vedic, and 1000 to 500, 600 BC we consider later Vedic period, right? So Vedic texts are associated with the period of 1500 BC to 500 BC, right? Second thing is Sangam literature. Now, Sangam literature, the periodization is very debatable because there are 3 Sangams that are associated, out of which we don't find a lot of material from the first 2 Sangams, and it is debatable whether these Sangams were historical or not. Right. Third Sangam left a lot of material at its disposal: Akkam poetry, Puram, the Tamil epics, Tolkapiyam, which is the grammar of Tamil, right? All the kind of Sangam literature that we find in this context. Now, Sangam literature has been broadly classified in the form that, okay, 3rd century BC to 6th century C is the broader time period within which we locate the a lot of the Sangam literature, right? This is a broad chronology, right? Because it's a lot of debate की कई लोग संगम को इससे पहले भी करते हैं, कई लोग संगम को बहुत लेट भी प्लेस करते हैं. तो within the ambit of longer chronology, Sangam literature is generally understood in the context of this period, right? Third thing is the Prakrit as a lingua franca. Lingua franca basically means there was a time when Prakrit was a very significant language of inscription. If you see the earlier text, earlier inscription, they were basically written down in Prakrit. So Ashokan inscription is written down in Prakrit, right? Uh, we find rather before Rudradaman's inscription, right? Junagadh inscription, we don't find many large inscriptions that are written in Sanskrit. So Prakrit was a major language in this context during the 3rd century BC, right? In the Mauryan period. Also, Prakrit, there were different kind of Prakrit that were prevalent in different parts of India, right? And Jain and Buddhist literature used a lot of Prakrit literature, particularly Ardh-Magdi, Saurashtri, and Vedic. These kind of Shailis that were used for the writing down of text, right? So Ardh-Magdi was very prominent in writing of Jain text. So Prakrit was divided in itself into different work. Prakrit basically means natural, right? So those languages which were considered to be language of the people, right? That was Prakrit, and there were many regional classification of this language. So 3rd century BC, the Mauryan period, inscriptions were being written down in Prakrit language. The 3rd century BC is the time period when we associate Prakrit as a lingua franca, right? Though even those scholars like Wendy Doniger, they claim he at no point Sanskrit was the only language, because most of the people are bilinguals or multilingual, so they can use Prakrit and Sanskrit simultaneously for talking to different people, right? But uh, for generally for common people, even if you see the Sanskrit natak, Sanskrit plays of Abhas, it is only the kings and the ministers, right, and the officials who speak Sanskrit. The women folk and the servant, they speak in Prakrit even if the text is in Sanskrit, right? So basically, what it means that Prakrit was a language of the common masses during this time. Right. Fourth, we come to Sanskrit as a state language. Now, many people consider Gupta period as a golden period of Indian culture, not because there was a very significant development, golden age in the sense of military or something political development, but in terms of cultural sense, Gupta period is known as a phase of revivalism of Indian culture, with a lot of emphasis being laid upon Sanskrit as a form of literature. Sanskrit literature was given too much emphasis, right? And Sanskrit emerged as a language of the court, right? We find a text like Allahabad Prayag Prashasti, written by Harishen on Samudragupta in Prayag, right? Which is a very important example of how Sanskrit ornate poetry, the kind of poetry which is ornamental, right? Which are laden with a lot of Sanskrit words, right? And the very standardization of what you call the classical Sanskrit, right? If you know, Sanskrit is either Vedic Sanskrit and classical Sanskrit. So the Vedic Sanskrit doesn't follow the Panini's Ashtadhyayi, but after 5th century, but when we find Ashtadhyayi of Panini, Sanskrit grammar started building upon. Texts like Ramayana and Mahabharata represent the transformation of the Sanskrit from Vedic to classical Sanskrit, wherein you do find certain elements of Vedic Sanskrit peppered down within the text. But there are elements of classical Sanskrit, but with poets like Kalidas writing down, we find a significant development of classical Sanskrit, right? So Gupta period is considered to be the period when Sanskrit became not just political poetry, political court language, but also a significant language of the literature. A lot of literature was being written down during the period of 4th century CE, right? So Sanskrit as a state language became significant in the 4th century CE. So, in our assessment, we will say that Vedic text is A is 3, B is 1, C is 2, and D is 4, right? So, A3, B1, C2 and T4. Option 3 is the correct answer, right? So in a way, these questions will help you to understand how to make relative chronology. Not just understood, important to understand chronology, because अगर आपने सिर्फ chronology याद कर लिया, बहुत सारे इवेंट जो हैं एक ही टाइम पर होते हैं, then you will get confused. तो अगर आपको ये नहीं पता है कि दूसरा या तीसरा इवेंट कब हुआ है, you at least need to know कि कौन सी चीज पहले हुई है. If there are multiple events that are happening on similar time period, you need to know the chronology in which they can be arranged. Then you will not be confused. वरना क्या होगा कि एक ही टाइम पीरियड में you will not be able to situate कि अच्छा इसको कहाँ पे प्लेस करें, इसको कहाँ पे प्लेस करें, because in ancient historical time frame there are lacking of absolute dates. There are always relative dates, right? Different chronology, different inscription will give you different estimates of the chronology, right? So to understand these kind of question, to prepare for these kind of question, you have to prepare chronologies in terms of absolute chronology as well as relative chronology or comparative chronology.